Hi guys. Okay. Let's do this. First question I see. What are your first impressions of the triple jump? Because it's a talent, the game doesn't present anything that can only be reached by triple jump. Does it feel this way? Yeah, I think that's true. There have been some things that it seemed like I could almost make with a double jump, but not quite. And it's not perfectly clear to me if those are things that... I'm thinking specifically of today, that jump that I tried to make, and that was the one that I ended up using the bash on the enemy to get up, right? So it usually feels like when I can't quite double jump, either like I need to try it a few times and it's clear that I could do it if I just timed it right, or it's clear that like I can't do it and there's another way to get through here. I feel a confidence in that. Now that might be unwarranted, because now that I have the triple jump, maybe there are some places that I can only access with the triple jump, just based on the aesthetics of the game, like the way that the game has sort of valued an ability to this sort of what am I trying to think of? There's something about the way the game has treated me so far that makes me believe it's unlikely that there are places I can only reach with the triple jump. And it's part of, I think, the aesthetic of it usually feels like I could always, if I reacted fast enough and did the right things, I could always get through areas without dying. In the same way, it feels like the game will always allow me to access everything in the world eventually, just by being good enough and thinking it through well enough. And the triple jump is a cheat, right? It feels like sort of an extra loot, It feels like it is an ability that I have that's outside the core mechanics or core systems of the game. I don't have a fancy academic word for that. I feel like I probably should. But there is a core system, and it feels like the whole game is playable within that core system. And then these additions to it, things like, extra energy. Well, I do need extra energy. I need at least a little bit of extra energy. But extra life, certainly all of the ability point stuff, feels like it's a bonus. Like, none of that is necessary. The game is designed so that I don't... I can play all of the game without spending any of my ability points. Spending ability points just makes certain things easier. Like, for example, breathing underwater. I have yet to encounter a place where it looks like I can do something because I can breathe underwater that I wouldn't be able to do with the breath holding mechanic. It's just easier now. Like, timing puzzles are easier. It's a thing that I don't have to worry about, which is cool. And I feel the same way about the triple jump. It makes things easier, but it doesn't make anything possible that was previously impossible. Or at least it doesn't make anything possible that, would never have been possible. It's maybe I can access some things now that I will get an ability later that would give me access to it. Like, I could imagine that. theoretically, if I did like intense grinding, I might have been able to get the triple jump before I got bash. That doesn't seem likely. I'm guessing that that would be really hard to do if it was even possible. But imagine for a second that I could do that. Then I would have been able to get up to that area that I ended up using bash to get to with the triple jump, right? So I would have gotten access to something that I couldn't previously get access to, but I would have eventually been able to access that. And that's a significant difference in my mind. So it does feel like the game is not presenting anything that can only be reached by triple jump. But triple jump is super nice to have. Like, it feels souped up, right? It feels very special. Question that I'm not sure how to interpret. How comfortable is your couch for a tall man to sleep on? It's actually not that comfortable for a tall man to sleep on. It's a love seat, so it's a short couch. It's good for like curling up to watch TV, but it would be uncomfortable to sleep on. I think you said initially that you wanted to have an evenly explored skill tree, and specifically said that in games you play once, you don't min-max at all. Did I say that? Did I say I don't min-max at all? Okay, maybe I did. I definitely was talking about evenly distributing the skill tree. Somewhere along the line, you started moving much further down one path. Did you notice that happening? Yeah, it happened today. Like, and I don't know 100% if that's the mood that I was in today. But we also entered kind of a second stage of the skill tree, where the early skill tree was all, you know, it was cheaper. It all cost 1 ability point. They were similar levels, I guess, of abilities, and now we're moving into a place where it's more expensive to fill out each ability, and the abilities are more powerful. And we're also getting close to the end where the abilities get really powerful. So I feel like there's an incentive that at some point that incentive shifted from, yeah, I can get sort of a lot of really general abilities that are going to help me out a lot of the time, to now, like, okay, I could get some abilities that very specifically are about fighting enemies, that are about attacking. I could get some abilities that are about exploring, or I could get some abilities that are about sort of maneuverability. Part of me feels like I've played enough that I can kind of, I have an emphasis. I would definitely, I'm going to fill out this branch of the tree because I want that defensive. I think that would be really useful. And then I'm going to move on to the green, which was all of the economy exploration stuff, because those are the parts of the game that are the most fun for me. Like, it's neat. I enjoy killing enemies. I enjoy using the, like, spirit fire or whatever. That feels smooth, but it's much more fun to me to jump around, because the platforming is so smooth in this game. And so getting abilities that allow me to improve that mobility and are going to sort of reflect the fact that I'm focusing more of my attention on those actual mechanics, I think it makes sense at this point. And I think based on the way they did the cost structure and the way that they sort of curved up the power of those abilities, like the incentive shifts a little bit at this point. It makes sense early on to fill stuff out pretty evenly, and it makes sense now to focus a little bit more. But maybe I'm just trying to justify the mood that I'm in, and the mood that I'm in was to follow that branch. I don't know that it's true that I don't ever min-max games that the first time that I play them, or when I play them once. I usually don't start out. That's true. I usually don't start out min-maxing. Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe it depends on the game. I'm trying to think of what my behavior is in different types of games. This may be a pattern where I start out and I want to generalize. And after I've played the game for a while, I don't know if I get tired of generalizing or if I feel like that's kind of served me as far as it's going to go. And I have a tendency to start focusing. I'm still not sure that I would describe what I'm doing as min-maxing either. It's focusing on a particular area. Like, the game gives me 3 different sets of mechanics, essentially. It differentiates them and says, you know, you have the ability to focus on one or all 3. And I've sort of gotten to a point where I feel like it makes sense to focus on one. That's interesting. But I did definitely notice it happening. What about the game made that happen for you? I think it's a combination of the incentive structures that we talked about, and you know, I may have just been in more of a mood where the idea of breathing underwater, the idea of triple jumping, and definitely the idea of taking reduced damage all sounded really appealing. I took a lot of damage today, and I feel like compared even to other days when I've been playing this game, not just because the game gets harder, although it certainly does, but it does that in a very smooth way. I feel like I was just kind of off a little bit, and I was just getting hit by a lot more stuff. And so maybe that contributed to it as well. Like, I just had an off day, I was taking damage, I saw that thing that said, hey, take less damage. That sounded like a good idea. Okay. Compound question about IndieCade. I could make a last-minute decision to drive 6 hours to attend IndieCade. It happens to coincide with my 3-day weekend from work. What does one do as an IndieCade attendee, and is it worth it to go unplanned on such short notice? Yeah, okay. So 6 hours is a long drive and a big investment. We should talk afterwards, but I don't know if I can offer you my couch. That said, IndieCade is really cool, and doesn't require like planning. You could certainly come last minute and get a lot out of it. Basically what you're going to see at IndieCade, there's 36, I think, finalist games. And the awards show is tonight, so some of those are now like award winners, but I don't know which ones. But all of them will be on display in the firehouse. So they sort of, it's literally a firehouse, and they clear out the fire engines and just pack it full of games. That's 36 games that are like of all sorts. Some of them are VR, some of them are tabletop, some of them are RPGs, a lot of them are digital games, just like sort of standard video games of different genres. That's they're all like really high quality. They're all really cool games. That's crowded. But if you spend some time there, you can, I mean, all of the games are available to play. Pretty sure all of those devs will be there, so you can talk to the people who made the games, about their games, their influences, anything you want. Make contacts, exchange business cards, get email addresses, stay in touch with people. Like, there's a lot of, depending on your level of comfort with networking, there's a lot of networking potential. And I have in the past gone to IndieCade as I guess mostly when I was a dev going to IndieCade. You know, I met some people, made friends, went out to dinner with them, had drinks with them, like really got to talk a lot with them. It was the folks from Chinese Room who did Dear Esther and just recently published Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which I haven't played yet, but looks awesome. And they did Amnesia 2. They're really cool people. Didn't really stay in touch with them, but had a really cool time sort of getting to know them and talking with them. So there's lots of networking opportunities. If you buy a ticket to the festival, a day pass or a 3-day pass, which I would recommend, there's a ton of stuff at the festival. I'm just like repping IndieCade now. I hope nobody minds that I'm just going to talk about like what IndieCade is. This will be a good reference video for anybody who ever has any questions about IndieCade in the future. So the activities, the festival grounds, is the stuff that I've contributed to for the last couple of years, and that is that's just kind of a ton of games and other stuff. And there's sponsor booths that are pretty neat. Like there's, especially if you're into game dev, there's a lot of good stuff that you can find there. But also if you're into, you know, just games, there's a lot of like people, game publishers who have booths. There's a lot of technology stuff as well. But then there's also a ton more games. So we have a selection of tabletop games, a selection of digital games, a selection of big games, including field games, and a selection of VR games, and a selection of esports. And so all of those have their own sort of area on the festival grounds. And some of them, they're sort of all playing all the time. Like the digital games, there's just 3 tents full of digital games. There's, I don't even know how many, 30, I don't know. There's a bunch. There's a bunch of digital games that are not the nominees. The nominees are all like submitted through a juried process, and then they're all played by jurors, and their scores are aggregated, and the top scoring ones are then sort of reviewed by the IndieCade jury committee, and the like top ones are chosen and awards are given out. These are just like, we have some people who know games and are excited about indie games, and they pick their favorite games. And so you get sort of more of a mix, but you also get some like really cool weird shit that like wouldn't be picked by a committee of jurors. And that's especially true in like the big games, because big games, you know, not a lot of big games make it to the nominees, and the ones that do are usually sort of like really stand out. They have some kind of a message, or they're you know, doing something really unique. A lot of the big games that we have that are played in the big game selections area are just fun. They're just a blast. I keep coming back to one that's by a friend of mine that is called Hermitug. And it's basically like a capture the flag kind of a game. Like it's a field game, but instead of flags, you're trying to capture laundry from the other team. And you have to do it while wearing a laundry basket on your back with your like arms tucked into it, so that you're like a hermit crab, and you have to like scuttle around the field like that as best you can, and steal laundry from the other side. And it's goofy, and it's silly, and it's nonsensical, and it's a ton of fun. So there's a bunch of games like that. There's esports, so there's tournament indie games going on all weekend, and there's there's an actual tournament on Sunday afternoon. In addition to all that, and then there's like a couple of tents where there are talks, or that sort of thing. There's celebration and craftsmanship. Craftsmanship has got a lot of sponsored talks or talks from exhibitors. It's also got talks from a bunch of the selection committees. So I'm going to be moderating a conversation with the tabletop games selection committee. And I know the big game selection committee is going to have like an hour where they do an audience participation design of a big game that then will get played later in the afternoon or later in the weekend. There's another tent where we're going to do well-played sessions for a few games, including Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. There's going to be one for that. There's going to be one for a couple other ones. Well-playeds, if you're not familiar with that, are some of my favorite things. Presentations of close readings of games, essentially. So somebody does sort of an analysis and possibly a play along of a game that they really like, and sort of presents it as an art piece, as a critical media piece. So that's a lot of fun. There's going to be interviews with the devs in that tent. There's going to be a couple of exhibition plays, I believe, including on Sunday, my design partner Elizabeth and I will be running a game of, what are we running? We're running The Quiet Year. So that'll be fun. On Saturday night, I think it's a separate ticket, although if you get a weekend pass, then it might be included in that. Saturday night is night games, so once the sun sets, we all go over to the park and we play games in the park in the dark, and that's a lot of fun. Anybody who saw Geek and Sundry last Friday when I was playing Restless, that's going to be there at night games, but there are going to be a ton of other games, big games, tabletop games, some digital games. There's going to be a virtual campfire and people playing music around it. Elizabeth is designing or has designed a game about a lighthouse trying to get boats across a field of rocks, and all of the boats are blindfolded and the rocks can only take one step at a time, and the lighthouse is trying to direct all of the boats, but they're all wearing the same colors, and so it's really hard and it's in the dark. That should be hilarious. Yeah, there's lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff at IndieCade. I'm not even getting into the conference because I would not sell the conference to anybody who's a casual attendee. I think what you would want is to get like a weekend pass to the festival. The conference is also really cool. There's like talks all weekend by a lot of big names who cover really interesting topics. But the people, I think most of the people who'd be interested in that have probably like picked out tickets and put together a schedule, and you also you end up in talks the whole time and you don't get to play all of the games that I helped to put together. So don't do that. Come play games. Anybody who's coming to IndieCade, I mean, like, it's a blast. It's a lot of fun. I will be around during the days most of the time, although honestly I'm like a lot of the work that I do for the conference takes place over the last like month, and so I am exhausted at this point. So I don't know that I'm going to be doing a lot of the like late night social stuff that a lot of people do. But there are a lot of super cool people who will be there who will be doing late night social stuff as well. And just the festival itself is a lot of fun. Yes. Okay. So that's IndieCade. Hi, IndieCade. I'll talk for a little bit longer. Okay, triple jump again. Once the triple jump is unlocked, the game changes entirely. While it feels really good, is it worth making what were previously puzzles something you can breeze past now? I think that the triple jump is maybe the most obvious example of how the game does this, but it's not the only example. And I would say that I don't know about the exploration path. I'd have to think about that. But the abilities that you get if you go down the red path, the combat path, I think are similarly game-changing. The difference between how you engage with the world when there are enemies around, if you don't have any of those combat abilities versus if you have all the combat abilities, you just like breeze through sections of the game that were challenging before, that were never impossible, but were things that you had to deal with, and you could, I would call them puzzles in the same way that some of the platforming bits that are broken by the triple jump are puzzles. So I feel like it's a very deliberate choice, and it's not a sort of unique, I guess, example. It's not something that is only seen in the triple jump. But it is kind of like the triple jump makes it pretty obvious. I don't think it's a problem. I feel like I had to make a choice, I would say even a sacrifice, by choosing sort of which branch I was going to focus on, or the fact that I was even going to focus on a branch. And so doing that, it feels like I got something for that. The triple jump is maybe too attractive, in the sense that like you see it and you think, oh, cool, that's going to break the game in a good way. Whereas you look at the combat abilities and you don't necessarily think that. But I think in practice they do. I think it is very, very similar. And the exploration stuff is potentially even more so. I mean, I would have to actually do it and see, but all of the abilities that give you that feedback loop into getting more ability, I feel like that stuff is that changes a lot in how you engage with the game at a higher level. Like, it's not moment to moment so much, but it changes your larger strategy quite a bit. And it changes, you could also argue that where part of the game, like maybe in my view, the most puzzly puzzles are where do you find these like bonus things that are super cool that give you power-up ability things. Either ability points or extra life or extra energy or whatever. Those, because they are sort of so optional and so difficult to find, those are sort of like the puzzliest puzzles in the game in my mind. Whereas the platforming, like, obviously you're doing platforming, like there's platforming, that's what you're doing. And the combat, like you run into enemies and you have to fight them and you have to get past them. So those, like when you get abilities that make those things easier, that's great, that's obvious. But when you get an ability that shows you where all the secrets are, like holy shit, that changes a lot. So I think like all of those branches are super powerful. They all sort of, break the game in different ways. And I feel good about how they break the game because I don't, at least so far, I don't feel like it is no longer fun. And maybe I'm, a different case. But even if the platforming stopped being enough of a challenge to really be interesting, I still have to deal with all of the combat, and I don't have all of the super cool abilities to do combat. And if I were an exploration player, I would also be, looking for all of the secrets that are all around the world. And I may or may not actually do that, but that's also a whole level of challenge. That's a whole set of challenges that I would have to engage in, or I have the ability to engage in. So I feel like the fact that there's this choice, and that all of the choices are like, equally powerful, mitigates the potential problem of having this super powerful ability that unlocks mid-game. After you cleared the section where you learned Stomp, the game definitely opened up for optional exploration and backtracking, whereas previously it had felt pretty linear, taking you from one area of the map to another. Especially coming right after a relatively difficult part of the game, the Jinso tree, do you think the game benefited a lot by giving you an opportunity to power up a little if you want before progressing the game? Oh, do we get to talk about grinding? Grinding is so interesting in games. So any game that has an experience system and has a grinding mechanic, grinding is one of those things that gets a really bad rap, because it's terrible. Like, it's awful. It's an awful experience when you feel like you're grinding. I hate that. Everybody hates that. And so games, when we think about grinding, we typically think about games, and I'm gonna cite some Final Fantasy games, or at least some JRPGs, even though I haven't really played any Final Fantasy games, and I haven't played a lot of JRPGs. Games that have a balance that require some amount of grinding, where you can go through the plot points of the game and you just will not power up enough to be able to do the things that you want to do. So you have to go back and you have to grind in order to progress. And that is fucking awful. I mean, that just feels terrible. You feel like you're doing a lot of work towards very little progress. And some of that is because you have to cover the same ground over and over and over again. Some of it is because you're literally not making story progress. Like, you are stuck in between plot points, just sort of doing the same thing over and over again. Some of it is just repetitive action. That is what people hate. But grinding is actually a really important mechanism for balancing a game. And if you look at a game like Ori, there's a... you hate grinding, but Quest for Glory? Quest for Glory? So, okay, let's talk about Quest for Glory before we talk about Ori. Quest for Glory, one of the things that I love about that is that in a lot of ways, the grinding is used well as a balancing mechanic. Now, sometimes, in some places, it is not used well. There are some things that, like, you start off low level. So I'm going to point out one of a mistake that was pointed out to me that I probably replicated when I played Heroine's Quest, but I don't actually remember. In Quest for Glory, I got to know Quest for Glory so well, and I played it so much, and I enjoyed it so much, that my approach to Quest for Glory was to create an extremely low-level, well-rounded character, and then grind them up in all of their stats to become a very high-level character who could do all kinds of stuff, and then power through the end game. Don't ask me why that was fun for me, but that's fun for me. And that's actually an approach that I take to a lot of games. I do a lot of... my approach to Final Fantasy games is that I will do as much grinding as I can stand as I go along. And then if I ever hit a point where I am not high enough level to beat the next part of the story, I will stop playing the game. Because that's it for me. Like, I don't want to stop. I don't want to backtrack. I'll sort of do as much grinding as I can stomach so that I can go as far as I can go. But that's all that I'll do. In Quest for Glory, you can set it up better than I set it up. If you set it up where you give the character ability points in their strengths, so for a fighter, if you give them a high parry and a high strength, for a magic user, if you give them a high magic and high intelligence, then you actually can solve most of the puzzles in the game in the way that they're intended to be solved by the individual classes, and you don't need to do a lot of grinding in order to level up the stats that, you know, you're only using some of your stats. So those level up in a pretty linear fashion as you play the game. You don't have to do a lot of grinding on them. And then you don't have to do a lot of grinding on your other stats because you never use them. I like to play these ridiculous, well-rounded characters where, like, I start off with all of their stats way too low, and then I grind up all of their stats so that they can do all sorts of things. And then I can choose how I want to solve different puzzles because I have all of the stats, which is not the way the game is intended to be played. But the neat thing about Quest for Glory, regardless of how you play it, is that if you can't figure out how to solve a puzzle one way, you have the ability to grind a different set of skills, especially early on, when, you know, the ability requirements are fairly low. You have the ability to grind a different set of stats and solve the puzzle a different way. And that's a really neat thing. That's I think gets at the heart of what makes grinding cool. What makes, like, why grinding is useful, is that it means that for players that have a high natural ability, they can play through the game at a high level of challenge. And players who have a lower natural ability, who would find that level of challenge frustrating and disengage from the game because of how frustrating they find it, have a different way to approach it. They can grind up their their experience or whatever, and get more abilities, and that lowers the effective challenge level of the game. And so now they can play through the same game at a lower effective challenge rate, effective challenge rating, at a lower challenge level, because they have these power-ups, and still get sort of the same level of satisfaction, the same level of flow out of that experience as the sort of the player with higher natural ability. I think Ori does this especially well because, as I can, yes, so pointing out, it's not necessarily players' baseline ability, their amount of reward in the face of micro failure, 100%. It's both. Baseline ability is also a factor in games where that's significant, which is a lot of games. But I think you're right, Foxdash, that that's not the only thing that's different between my two hypothetical players, and it's probably not even the main thing. The main thing that's different is one player has a higher tolerance level for frustration, and therefore will engage well with more difficult challenges where they fail more often. Or I love the term microfailure. So they have a higher tolerance for microfailure. Highly correlated with phenotypes for dopamine reception. Awesome. That's more physiology than I know, but I totally believe it. Like, that makes sense to me. So Ori, what's nice about Ori is that the abilities that you are grinding up are all optional. Like, it's possible to play the game without them. So you're like, there's a baseline playthrough of the game where it's at a high, challenge level, or it's at a place where you're going to have a high tolerance for failure, for frustration. You're going to need to be that kind of a player. You're also going to have a higher skill set, which maybe is more practiced, in order to get through the game. But you actually, there's no like actual game requirement. There's nothing in the game system that ever requires you to level up any of those abilities. You can play through the game without doing it. And there's definitely some level of balance. So like later enemies will do higher damage to you, which implies that there's an expectation that you will have enough life that makes a difference. If you go through the entire game with 1 life, then it would never matter how much damage an enemy does to you, because a single hit would kill you. So there's certainly, I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but the sort of the emphasis that the game puts, that balance curve at the lowest level is so low, it's so slight, that you can essentially play through the game. You can certainly play through the game without ever grinding, right? Because even if you barely kill any enemies, if you barely collect any experience, you're still gonna get enough stuff that you're gonna be playing at this baseline where the game is tuned to be really hard but still playable. As opposed to the JRPGs that drive everybody crazy, there are battles that are absolutely tuned toward you're going to take hits, and how much damage those hits do as a percentage of your health is that's something that gets balanced. And it's balanced based on you being a certain level. And so if you're not that level, then you're not going to be able to, be effective in that situation. Ori is not that. And I think that's really cool. I think that that's a perfect level of grinding. I can grind as much or as little as I want. And it gives me rewards that feel meaningful for grinding. But it never sort of withholds my ability to progress in the game for not grinding. And that's great. That's a balance that feels really, really good to a player. But it's hard to do, right? It was a lot of design work, to sort of figure out the systems and balance them together, to make the game able to do that. So, good job, Ori team. That's really cool. That's a highlight of the game to me. What do you think of Stomp being flicking down only? Do you think you trigger it by accident? I've triggered it a couple times by accident. So far it hasn't been a big deal. I'm more frustrated when I attempt to do the move, and I don't press enough down for it to trigger. I'm slightly to the side, and so it doesn't do a stomp. The pro of doing it this way is that you don't have to add in another button, which is definitely a plus, especially to accessibility. The more buttons you make a player memorize, the more different buttons you have to ever press, the harder it is to just, physically control that controller. It does seem a little inelegant to me, just because I feel like my accuracy with it is lower than pretty much every other aspect of my control over Ori. But yeah, I think that's still... I don't know that it would have been better to add a button press. First of all, I mean, I don't know what button it would be. It would either be like an L3 or R3, which is terrible, or it would be an L1, which would be okay from a like physics of controller standpoint, but doesn't mentally map well to what you're doing. Pulling the left trigger in order to do a ground pound doesn't really make any sense. Like, you know, that's there's no easy mental mapping for that. Whereas pressing down to do a stomp, to do a ground pound, like, I mean, that's obvious, right? The mental mapping is super easy. So you're overcoming the fact that, like, it's a difficult mental mapping in order to make it a little bit more accurate. You could almost make an argument for the right bumper, because we already used the right trigger, and so that's sort of clustered nicer. But then you're introducing bumpers. No, I guess left trigger is what you would have to do. And you could make an argument that especially later on you receive the feather, and so right trigger is the feather, and that keeps you in the air more, and left trigger is the opposite of that. It brings you down to the ground fast. Yeah, maybe. I am betting, my guess, just based on how smooth the rest of this game is that they play tested the hell out of it, and down was maybe the lesser of evils, but it was the best way to actually communicate that action, because it is easy to remember. It's super obvious. It took me a second to remember how to do the bash, that I had to hit the Y button. It only took me a second to remember that, but that's not a button that I ever press, and it's not a button that, like, is particularly well mapped to jumping around projectiles. Whereas pressing down to do a ground pound is, it's impossible to forget that. So that is an advantage that it has. Eve White thinks I'm beautiful. Thanks, Eve. Appreciate it. Jason is just trying to, like, come in and ruin up chat a little bit. But that's okay, Jason. I love you for that. Okay, I don't know how long I've gone. I've gone for like 40 minutes maybe. That's enough Q&A. Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining in. It sounds like at least some people are still up on Ori, so I think the plan will be to play Ori again next week, unless I have Halloween-related crises, which I'm not expecting. So next Thursday, same time, same channel, play-by-play, more Ori and the Blind Forest. I'm really looking forward to it. I feel like I'm more than halfway through the game now. I think this is a longer game than I usually play. I don't know. I guess I've played some long games. It's really fun though. It's really, really super good. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for giving me an excuse to play it finally. I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying sharing it with all of you. So Thanks again. If you're at IndieCade this weekend, I hope to see you there. And if not, then just have a wonderful weekend. And I'll see you next week. All right, have a good night.